welcome to the land down under, mainland Australia, the world's largest island and smallest continent. And if you take a closer look, you'll find the Northern Territory, located at the center of the island, a home to the capital city of Darwin and the original Aboriginal culture. And this area is home to a few national parks, including the Uluru-Kata Tjuta National Park, almost 2,000 miles south from Darwin, right in the heart of the island. And the park contains the two geological features that it's named for, and one of those features is the Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock, Australia's most natural icon and a focal point of indigenous culture. Standing over 1,100 feet high, this huge sandstone monolith is much like an iceberg, in that the bulk of it is actually underground. The perimeter around the base is 5 miles. It's the iron oxide in the sandstone that gives the rock its reddish hue. Around sunrise and sunset, it makes it appear to change colors. The locals consider this rock sacred and therefore they refrain from climbing it, even though many tourists have hiked it over the years. The park is also home to loads of natural wildlife, such as red kangaroos, emu, lizards, wallabies, and desert dingoes. Dingo is just another name for wild dogs in Australia, and they're considered to be descendants of the wolf. Usually around 35 pounds, they aren't big but are naturally lean, like greyhounds. They're social pack animals, usually hunting for meat and food at night, and they have historically been considered harmless by the public. However, not everyone thought they were harmless. In the months leading up to the events in today's episode, Uluru Chief Park Ranger Derek Roof definitely did not think so. He wrote to his superiors asking for ammunition so that he could thin out the dingo packs. He informed them of the escalating threats in the park. Incidences of dingoes attacking children, even biting them to the point of drawing blood at times. And although the thinning out never happened, though clueless tourists continue to ignore the dingoes, it would prove to be a fatal mistake for one family.
Hello, I'm Melody.
I'm Darlene.
And this is
Hard Times and True Crimes.
Darlene, what are you drinking today?
I'm drinking a creme brulee oat milk flat white.
Oh, that sounds really good.
It is so good. It's very comfort. I don't know. It feels very comforting, very fall.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
What are you drinking?
Well, I'm also having the flat white since this episode is based out of Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I don't know if you knew this, but they're known, I think they came up with the flat white in Australia.
That is so cool.
Yeah. So just for that reason, I'm having a flat white. Mine is an oat milk butterbeer flat white.
That sounds so good.
It is actually delicious. It was way better than I even expected.
Yeah.
I'll definitely have it again. So our coffees today came from Nanny Mae's right here in Asheboro, North Carolina.
Yes, one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's a great little local coffee shop. And so we just wanted to give them a shout out because they sponsored us with the coffees and they are wonderful.
They are. Go get yourself a flat white.
Yes. So thank you, Nanny Mae's.
Yes, thank you.
So have you heard the saying, "A dingo's got my baby"?
Yes, from the Wild Thornberries.
Oh, okay.
The movie.
I remember. Well, it used to be a show, and then they did the movie.
Yep, from the movie with the Rugrats.
Yes. I'm glad you said that. I was going to say, do you remember where you heard it? But do you know where that saying originated?
No, I have no idea.
Well, that phrase has actually been referenced many times in pop culture over the past few decades in TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, The Simpsons, Modern Family, and then the one where I originally heard it, Seinfeld, very well known for, using that. And also in movies such as Tropic Thunder and the Rugrats movie, which you just talked about. It's always made light of. It's used like a punchline. But the reality of that phrase is actually nothing to joke about at all. In fact, it's very sobering and it's a heart-wrenching story.
Oh, no.
So here we go.
Okay.
In the summer of 1980, Azaria Chantel Lauren Chamberlain was born to Michael and Lindy Chamberlain. She was their third child, and after 2 little boys, Aiden, aged 6, and Reagan, aged 4, the family was excited to welcome a little girl into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after the birth of this baby, the family ventured out on holiday to the Northern Territory of Australia to see Ayers Rock.
Okay. Did they live in Australia?
They do live in Australia, but quite a distance from Ayers Rock. They lived in a place called Mount Isa.
Okay.
And I will tell you a little bit more about that later. It actually plays into this story. Ayers Rock in the local tongue was known as Uluru. Australia's most famous natural feature was there. They planned to camp for a few days and explore the area. The Chamberlains were on day 2 of their trip to the park to see the rock, and they were camping close by. They had spent the day. Michael and the boys had gone to climb the rock, and Lindy stayed behind with 9-week-old Azaria to see some local caves.
Okay.
Although the family was camping in remote Uluru-Kata Tjuta National Park, that was not a deserted area by any means. In fact, it was right in the middle of the Australian outback, and it was teeming with tourists.
So she wasn't like by herself out there?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It was August 17th, 1980, and after that day's activities, they had returned to camp. They were fixing dinner, and they were actually socializing with other campers. This area, like they had a communal barbecue area.
All right.
Imagine if you're out camping and there's like an area where there's a lot of picnic tables and stuff where different families commune around that. This area was in close proximity to dingo lairs, and a few had already been spotted around the area. At one point, Michael, while putting food on the Barbie, had even tossed a scrap of food at one of them. Now, today, the Queensland Government Environment website page states, and I quote, "Risk of dangerous behavior is greatly increased in dingoes that have become familiar and habituated to humans through feeding or other encouragement." Unquote.
Okay.
They warn to never feed dingoes. In hindsight, if the tourists in the area had known those facts, perhaps they would have been more cautious. But as it was, they just didn't know it at this time just how dangerous this could be.
Right. Ugh, yeah.
In fact, on this evening, one of the other campers close by to where the Chamberlains were camping, he said he too had thrown a chop bone out to one of the dingoes that had ventured near the camp. As Michael was barbecuing, Lindy was getting the younger children to bed. She had already tucked in Reagan, the 4-year-old, for the night. But their older son, Aiden, he was still kind of up, hanging around with adults for a little longer. When Lindy put little Azaria in the tent, she was fast asleep, and Lindy returned to the common area, and the family continued, socializing with other campers. In just a bit after she had laid Azaria down, Lindy heard a cry from Azaria, and she went to check on her. About halfway to the tent, she spotted the shadow of a dingo coming out from it, and it appeared to have a bundle in its mouth.
Oh, my goodness.
So she quickly entered the tent and discovered the baby was gone. She immediately realized what had happened and alerted the others with that now infamous quote, "The dingo's got my baby."
Oh, my goodness.
She yelled for a torch, or what we would call a flashlight.
Mm-hmm.
It was night, and the dingo had disappeared into the darkness of the bushland with her infant daughter. A nearby camper grabbed his flashlight and went off in the direction that Lindy indicated the dingo had gone with the baby. Unbeknownst to the Chamberlains at this time, this camper was in fact an amateur animal tracker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he followed a track that looked a little different than the other dog tracks, and he actually found a spot where something had been placed. It was an indentation in the earth or in the sand, and you could kind of see the impression of something that appeared to be a knitted garment, almost like the dingo had set it down for a little bit.
Okay.
And there was a wet spot nearby that could have been either saliva or blood. He couldn't tell for sure. Unfortunately, he lost the tracks when they led into a parking lot.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't imagine.
Park rangers and police were called to the area, and they called in some local Aboriginal trackers to help with the search. Meanwhile, at the tent site, The first officer on the scene found dog hairs inside the tent, and the baby's blankets were torn as though they had been bitten and chewed by a dog. There was also blood inside and on the tent wall. Michael and Lindy had been frantically searching with the other campers in the area until officers instructed them to remain at the tent site. Michael remarked to one of the nearby campers, "She's probably dead now." And that will become important later in the story.
Okay.
The baby was not found that night, and eventually they had to stop searching. Arrangements were made to put the family up in a hotel for the night, where, of course, Michael and Lindy spent a very sleepless night.
Right.
The next morning, they spoke with authorities. They were questioned. They gave their story of events, and they told the officers exactly what had happened. And then eventually they had to head home to Mount Isa, where they were from. Some of the officers that were part of the initial investigation already doubted the Chamberlain's version of events. One of them, by the name of John Lincoln, he said he didn't buy it. He said this had never happened before.
Okay.
And he just didn't believe it had happened that way. Now, that sounds familiar to the story you did last week about the sharks.
Yes.
Because it had never happened before. So they just didn't believe it for sure at first. However, another one of the officers named Michael Gilroy, he replied, actually, it had happened before.
Oh.
While there had not been a fatal attack, there had actually been recent attacks on children in that park. But Lincoln, he would not be convinced. He questioned the possibility that a dingo could actually carry a 10-pound baby such a long distance. And then, oddly enough, to prove his point, he got a pail and filled it with about 10 pounds of sand, put it in his own mouth, and tried to carry it around. Which he could do for less than a minute. And then he challenged the other officers to try it. Which, definitely was not an expert or a credible test.
No, because they have different jaw strengths for one thing.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who knows anything about dogs know there are certain dog breeds that have very strong jaw muscles.
Right.
As you can imagine, when the media caught wind of this event, they were all over that story. It was such an unbelievable tale. This ran not only in the Australian papers, but in the U.S. papers and in the U.K. They were all scrambling to get the story, and Michael and Lindy decided to consent to interviews.
Okay.
They felt they could possibly raise awareness and keep this from happening to somebody else. Like I said, the public sense of the dingo being harmless was inaccurate, but it was widespread. They certainly hadn't realized the danger. Once the Chamberlains gave those interviews, things just went downhill for them very quickly. You know how the media can spin a story.
Yes.
And you know how we all tend to form our own opinion of a situation based on our perception of a news story. Well, the Chamberlains, they did not come across in those interviews very well. For one, they seemed to have come to peace with the death of their daughter way too quickly. Michael admitted that it was not long after the baby went missing that he realized the outcome would not be good, and he already kind of knew she was dead, and he made that statement to one of the campers.
Yeah.
Vocalizing it out loud, some people thought that just sounded like, oh, he knows that because he knows more about this story than he's telling.
Right. And it sounds kind of callous. Most people want to hold out hope for their child.
Actually, that was what I was going to say next, that it was the Chamberlains, their way of crediting their faith with their ability to remain strong.
Mm-hmm.
But others felt that grief was just too callous and didn't feel legit.
Okay.
It was just too matter of fact.
But we know we can't necessarily judge those reactions, even though we do.
We do. I do. I know that I do.
I do too.
Many times when I've seen people on TV talking about their missing children, I'm just like, yeah, I'm not buying it.
Yeah. Me too.
Some of those people felt that way. And the media, again, was able to put their spin on it as well.
Right.
In one interview, Lindy actually described the way a dingo eats its prey in a very factual way. And it really gave some people pause. Like she went in.
That gives me pause.
Yeah. She actually was saying how it peels the skin off of its victims and eats it like an orange. Like,
oh my God.
Yeah, it sounded bad.
Yeah.
So the public, they're starting to believe maybe a dingo was not responsible for this tragedy at all. Maybe the Chamberlains really had more to do with that. Make no mistake, the police also had their own theory about what had happened to baby Azaria as well. and it didn't line up with what the Chamberlains were telling them. 1 week after Azaria had gone missing, her jumper, nappy, or what we would call a diaper, and booties were found in the Australian bush near dingo lairs. One piece of clothing was missing. It was a matinee jacket that Azaria had been wearing over the top of her outfit. Again, some of this language is just a little different. We're here in the U.S., and this was Australia. But a matinee jacket is just kind of like a little overcoat.
Okay.
It had not been found with the other items of clothing. The volunteer searcher who found the items, now later on, he stated that the outfit was kind of crumbled up before he alerted authorities. When he found it, he didn't touch it. But when the officer arrived, he picked up the outfit, examined it, and then laid it back out on the ground to take pictures of it. And the way he placed it back was just maybe a little bit more neat. And that actually spurred rumors that the clothes had been folded up, that they had been placed that way. And that really cast more doubt on the claims of Lindy and Michael.
Right. That damaged their case more.
It really did. All right. Now, that's not the only rumor that got started. Someone somewhere claimed that Azaria means sacrifice in the desert.
Oh, gracious.
Yeah. Now,
these conspiracy theories.
Now, Michael was actually a pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist religion.
Okay.
And folks, they start these wild tales that this couple had taken their baby out there to sacrifice her in the wilderness because their church was like an occult that participated in child sacrifice.
Oh, my goodness.
And that was not at all true. And that name does not mean that. So the Chamberlains, people started harassing them. People would actually drive by their home and like howl like dingoes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. They were spat on and mocked when they would go like to public hearings and stuff. Now, if they're guilty, we don't have a lot of sympathy for that.
Right.
But if they're not guilty,
right.
I mean, how cruel does that seem?
Yeah. And there is something to be said for due process.
Right. Until we know for sure they're guilty. And I mean, not that I would still condone that anyway, but I just wouldn't have as much sympathy. If they're guilty, I'm not going to feel as bad.
Exactly.
But still, the Chamberlains had no idea how that harassment would actually evolve into something way more. On February 20th, 1981, just 6 months after the baby was taken, the coroner held an inquest. Mm-hmm. Do you remember when we did the Lana Turner episode, we talked about an inquest is just for the coroner to determine what the cause of death was, and then if you need to go to trial or not.
But they don't have a body,
No, there's no body.
So I'm just curious how they can determine a cause of death.
Well, true. But this coroner did find the Chamberlains not guilty of the murder of Azaria, and possibly that's why.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense because you're supposed to be, well, in the U.S., I don't know how it is there, but in the U.S., you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, and there's no way to prove guilt without a
But sometimes
body in that
people,
case.
you know how it is, there's almost like a trial by media.
Oh, yeah.
And people have already determined your guilt way before you ever get to a real trial.
That happens a lot.
So he actually did determine a dingo had taken the baby.
Oh, okay. So he believed that.
He did. At the end of that inquest, he did say something kind of curious. He stated that her clothes had been interfered with by persons unknown.
Well, wouldn't that be the guy who found them in the desert?
Yes, but that didn't come out until way later, many years later.
Oh.
That rumor about the clothes persisted for years, and the truth of how that went down, it was years before that was actually put out there.
Okay.
So on this, people are going on the assumption the clothes were folded.
Gotcha.
The coroner also somewhat scolded the police for how they had treated the Chamberlains to this point. And unfortunately, that caused a little bit of embarrassment to the police. And it kind of fueled them to find more evidence that they needed.
They kind of doubled down.
They did to, find something to charge them for the crime that they believed had happened. And so now any evidence they found was solely for the purpose to fit their theory and not the other way around, as it should be.
So they had tunnel vision for sure.
They did. In September of 1981, Michael and Lindy's home was raided and their car was seized.
Wow.
Now, their car was a yellow Holden Tirana. I don't think we have those here in the U.S. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, but they took that. They gathered as much evidence from it as they could get, and it was forensically analyzed. And investigators then found experts who could help them determine how that evidence proved the Chamberlains' guilt.
Mm. There wasn't very much in the way of forensics at that time, was there?
Well, that's a big part of this story, actually.
Okay.
Early on in the investigation, it was believed that the tears that they had found in the retrieved baby clothes were from a dog's mouth and teeth. But now investigators actually had an expert who said those tears were not from a dingo. Instead, he found that those were from scissors.
Oh, goodness. Now, and this is the prosecution's investigators.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And this particular expert was James Cameron. He also stated that no dingo saliva had been found on the clothing. Based on the large amount of blood centered around the neck of the baby jumpsuit, they said that appeared that the baby had been decapitated.
Oh, my goodness.
They found blood under the passenger seat of the car. So Joy Kuehl, she was the examiner that was responsible for testing the blood in the car.
Mm-hmm.
She confirmed fetal blood was found in that stained area beneath the passenger seat and in 22 separate areas of the car.
Uh-oh.
And she said that was indicative that blood had sprayed from a cut artery while the baby was still breathing.
Okay, now again, this is prosecution's.
That is the prosecution's witnesses.
Okay.
It was really very damning evidence, though.
Yeah. I
mean, blood in 22 places.
So was it a lot of blood?
It was a lot of blood.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess if an artery
Yeah.
had, okay.
So due to that overwhelming new evidence, in November of 1981, the Northern Territory Supreme Court quashed the results of the first inquest and ordered a new one. Now,
I wish they could find the body.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate,
I know. Now, again, that word quashed is probably not something we hear in the U.S. a lot, but it means if testimony is quashed, it's wiped from the record.
Okay.
The findings of the second inquest with all of that new evidence resulted in Lindy being charged with first-degree murder.
Wow.
And Michael was charged as an accessory to it with helping her basically cover up a crime.
Honestly, I'm really surprised. Not necessarily that they may have charged her. Evidence. With him anyway.
But they're saying that the outfit's been cut with scissors.
Okay.
Blood is in their car in 22 places. The matinee jacket.
Yeah.
Because they didn't find any saliva on the clothes.
Okay.
And she's saying because that matinee jacket was over it.
Okay.
But they're saying there's no matinee jacket. Nothing's been found of that nature.
Okay. I gotcha. Yeah.
By the time the trial rolled around in September of 1982, Lindy was actually 7 months pregnant with her fourth child. Unfortunately for her, it made her look worse in the public's opinion. It seemed like some people felt, well, she doesn't deserve to have the happiness of another child when she's killed her other one. Because, again, people have already deemed her guilty.
Right.
Without the trial.
Right.
Some of them, they felt like it was a slap in the face to themselves that she could become pregnant while she's being charged with the murder of her other baby. So it was kind of like another ding in her character.
Okay.
So at this trial, the prosecutors presented the following theory of what had happened. That Lindy had taken her son Aiden to the tent, the 6-year-old, had left him inside while she had taken the baby to the car, slit the baby's throat.
Oh my gosh, okay.
And then stuffed the body into a camera bag because they found blood in that bag. They alleged that she then cleaned herself up, went to the tent, staged the scene by putting some of the baby's blood around inside, and then returned to that little social hub with the other campers as if nothing had happened.
What about the kids? Would they not have seen any of this?
Good question.
Yeah.
That is a good question. And that question was not answered by the prosecution.
Okay.
She supposedly did all this within like a 10-minute window.
Yeah, I don't know.
There were many witnesses that night around the communal area, and nobody had noticed anything amiss that even would suggest that theory could be correct.
Let me ask a question. Was that the same day that she was left alone with the baby and her husband and
yes.
Had anybody seen the baby?
Yes, the baby had been with them at the communal area that evening when they were barbecuing, and people had seen her go to put the baby in the tent to put it to bed.
Okay.
Yep.
So the baby was alive after that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, some of the fellow campers in the communal area that night, they witnessed at the trial.
And her defense?
Well, the prosecution called them, but they actually ended up helping the defense with their testimony.
Okay.
I don't even know why the prosecution did call them. So Sally and Greg Lowe, they were campers that were like next to the Chamberlains that night. They had all kind of met and, just been socializing together. They both had a baby, that kind of thing. They testified they had seen Lindy after she went to the tent, and there was no blood on her. And furthermore, it was after that, when Lindy had come back to the group, that they heard that cry that Lindy heard.
Okay. And it's not so easy to clean up when you're out camping. It's not like you have a water supply right there that you can just clean up real quick.
Exactly.
With that much blood.
Exactly.
If it was a severed, artery from the neck.
The fact that they heard that cry, that would actually make the prosecution's theory impossible. If she had killed the baby by then, they wouldn't have heard the cry.
They wouldn't have heard her cry. Yeah.
Another witness by the name of Judy West, she also testified she had heard a dingo growl low and deep, almost like a warning, peremptory growl, about 5 to 10 minutes near the camp before she heard Lindy scream out that the dingo had taken her baby.
Wow.
She also testified, get this, she herself had actually had to shoo off a dingo earlier that had grabbed her 12-year-old by the arm and pulled.
Oh, my gracious. So there was definitely dingoes around there that were trying to get children.
On the prosecution side, then there were also a couple of witnesses whose testimony hurt the Chamberlains' case. For instance, one lady said that shortly after Azaria disappeared, Michael had come to her camper door and related to her that a dingo had taken their baby and she was probably dead already. She also said that Lindy stated, whatever happened, it was God's will.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
That usually takes some time to come to terms with.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because even as I was researching this and thinking about it, and as Christians, we do eventually come to that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it takes when you've suffered and gone through a huge loss.
Yeah.
Sometimes you go through a whole lot before you get to the point before you realize that that God's will be done.
Especially, I think, in the suffering of your child.
Oh, that would be the biggest test of that, really.
Yeah.
What was their strong faith in the midst of adversity? Others really did see that, it's just callous and emotionless.
Right.
And it's still easy for us to see it like that too. It does seem that way.
Yeah.
Other evidence presented at trial included other expert witnesses. One had performed some rather crude tests. His opinion was that a dingo's jaws could not even open far enough to carry a baby by the head. And yet, when he was shown photos of a dingo holding a baby-sized doll by the head, he didn't really have an answer for that. And he could only admit that, well, maybe I was mistaken. The dingo hair that they had found in the tent, well, at this trial, the prosecution had an expert that said, that's not even dog hair, that's cat hair.
What's the motive?
The prosecution never shared a motive. They could not come up with one, and they did not feel the need to give one.
I don't know if it's like that there, but here, don't you have to have a motive?
Well, I think if you have any hope of proving your case, yeah. I think it's just typically like you have to have the means, motive, and what's the third thing?
Opportunity.
Yeah. So that's a crucial point of the case that's missing.
I could see if she was like going through postpartum, you know what I mean? If there was like anything, but
the prosecution did not present any of that. Their only thing was the rumor of the child sacrifice. And I don't think they put that.
They put that?
Well, I was going to say, even they knew that was ridiculous. And the media, the people, and the public might have been saying that.
Right.
But I think even the prosecution knew better than to try that ridiculous line of... Okay, so you remember that forensic evidence had shown no dingo saliva on the baby's clothes. Mm-hmm. Mrs. Chamberlain's defense was that matinee jacket was covering the clothing. And then remember, I told you the prosecution said that never existed. They pretty much accused her of lying. They said, no, there's no matinee jacket. Not only are they accusing her of lying, they were really ruthless to her on the stand, ripping her apart at times. And she broke down in sobs once on the stand and said, we're talking about my baby daughter here, not some object.
Oh, wow.
How heart-wrenching that must be.
Right.
At the conclusion of that trial, the evidence of the fetal hemoglobin found in several places in the car was too hard for the defense to overcome. They had even put forth their own expert who contested the accuracy of those results, those blood tests. He just felt that it was inaccurate. Mm-hmm. But he wasn't able to convince the jury of that. He just didn't have enough to compel them.
Okay.
So on October 29th, 1982, Lindy was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with hard labor.
Mm.
Their jury had retired just a little over 6 hours before the verdict was read, and one juror said that all hell broke loose. In the end, the scientific evidence had outweighed the numerous witness accounts.
Mm.
Furthermore, Michael was found guilty of helping her conceal a crime, but his sentence was suspended because he actually had to raise the children on his own. He had 2 other children at home.
That was human baby blood.
The expert testified that it was fetal blood, like it was in a baby that was younger than,
Okay.
I think, 6 months. So that was what the Crown's expert testified to.
And there was a lot of it.
That's what they said.
Okay.
Just a few short weeks after the sentencing, Lindy gave birth in prison on November 17th, 1982, to their 4th child, Kalia, little girl.
Mm.
Lindy was allowed 1 hour to be with her baby before she was taken away. Sadly, Kalia ended up being placed in foster care within months of her birth.
Oh. The dad couldn't raise her, or they took her?
I couldn't find out why. I'm pretty sure it's because he just had his hands full trying to raise the 2 boys and he couldn't.
Okay.
At that point, she was put in foster care.
Okay.
Of course, there was a series of appeals that were continually rejected, and things were pretty bleak for the Chamberlains. Anybody would have lost hope, but the couple stood together and continued their fight to prove their innocence. And it wasn't just Michael and Lindy who were fighting. There were others working behind the scenes to help the Chamberlains. That guilty verdict did not sit right with some of those expert witnesses for the defense. Remember that pathologist that testified for the defense about the blood evidence that he thought it was inaccurate?
Mm-hmm.
He still believed this evidence was faulty. So he started performing some tests of his own. His theory was that the chemical used to determine that fetal blood was reacting with something from the environment where the Chamberlains lived, because they actually lived in a mining town right at Mount Isa. It was like a mining town.
Mm-hmm.
So he collected some copper and zinc oil from the area, and in his own test, he was able to obtain the same fetal blood result.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He realized something was reacting with that copper oxide dust. So now every bit of that forensic evidence is called into question.
Yes.
Including that blood spray that was like under the passenger seat of the car. And they had actually found some blood spray under the dash of the car.
Okay.
And so now it's questionable how accurate that really was. And he says it's not accurate.
Okay.
At this time, another guy gets involved by the name of Les Smith. He had a friend who was copying transcripts of the trial for the Chamberlains, trying to help him save some money. And so he was helping him make those copies. And as he's doing that, he's reading the transcripts.
Right.
He becomes a little bit invested in the case. So he actually starts doing his own investigation. He starts looking in the paper for cars for sale that was just like their Tirana.
Right.
And every weekend, he would go and find these cars for sale, and he would go look at them and examine them, the brackets in the cars that was supposedly covered in blood. And what he found is that all of the cars he inspected had the exact same spray pattern on them as the Chamberlain's car did.
Oh, my God. Oh, goodness.
The spray pattern that was used as proof of the infant blood. Incredibly, the spray was indeed not blood, but it was overspray from when the car was manufactured.
Well, how in the world?
Well, when it was combined with that copper oxide dust, It gave a faulty positive blood result.
Oh,
I mean,
that's terrible.
It is terrible. And it's amazing to me that people dug that deep to find that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so glad they
must
did.
have really believed in their
They did.
innocence.
Yeah. All right. As if that's not enough, another expert re-examined the evidence of that animal hair that had been found inside of the tent. And at first they said it's dingo hair. And then the prosecution had a witness that said, no, it's not even dingo hair, it's a cat hair.
Right.
Well, after taking a look at the hairs, this is an expert who actually wrote a book about dingoes and their fur and their hair and stuff. After he re-examined all of that evidence, he said, yeah, that's definitely dingo hairs. In addition to that, the marks on the baby's clothing that the prosecution's witness had said had been cut with scissors.
Yeah.
He also determined, no, those were dingo teeth tears.
Oh, my
So all of
goodness.
this evidence is being refuted.
Right.
And it did look as if Lindy's next appeal would have to be approved because all of that new information.
I hope so.
Nope.
Oh, no.
In 1985, that new evidence was submitted to the Northern Territory government requesting a new inquiry, and it was denied.
That's terrible.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the faulty science because you just did the episode about the sharks, and you talked about that in that episode about some of those experts they were saying similar stuff. Like,
right. They were saying sharks' teeth couldn't bite through human bone, and that's definitely not true.
Yeah, and those were the experts of the day.
Yeah.
Which makes you really question, and this is a little ironic because as I was writing this story, I'm also reading a book for school called Defeating Darwinism. Mm-hmm. The ironic part of that is where Lindy was imprisoned was in Darwin in Australia.
Oh, okay.
There's a physicist quoted in that book. His name is Richard Feynman. And he says to scientists, when you are testing an experiment to prove a theory, one of the points he makes, one of the first principles of science is that you must not fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool.
Yes.
And, he's just meaning like once you have that tunnel vision, you're convinced that everything that you're seeing is proving your point, even if it's really not.
Yes, that's so true.
So when I read that and I was researching this story, I couldn't help but make a correlation between the two because it feels like the prosecution's witnesses fooled themselves.
Yes.
Because these other expert witnesses were able to do further tests. They actually searched for the other cars. Why didn't the prosecution do that?
Right.
So a turning point came in February of 1986. An English hiker by the name of David Brett was climbing Ayers Rock when he slipped and fell, and it killed him. Searchers went out to that area looking for his body when one of the searchers came upon something very interesting. What's so interesting, one, is that this searcher was one of the only ones in this search who had also been a part of the search for baby Azaria. Mm. What he found was that missing matinee jacket.
Oh, wow.
As soon as he saw it, he knew what it was. So it's just interesting that maybe another one of those searchers would not have known.
Right.
But since he had been involved,
he knew.
He just knew. The jacket was taken to Alice Springs Courthouse, and days later, Lindy was brought in to look at it, and she made a positive ID that, that's it. That was a huge break in this case because it proved that Lindy was not lying the whole time she was telling those investigators that.
Yeah.
And just like that, Lindy was released from prison.
Oh, goodness.
Just like that. She finally was reunited with her family.
Wow.
Now, she had been jailed for 3 years, in prison for 3 years at this point. I had read somewhere that there was a reporter that threatened the government officials and said, if you don't let her go, we're going to expose all of this stuff.
Yeah.
So they let her out pretty quickly. Unfortunately, almost like a slap in the face, it took many more years before she was actually declared innocent of the crime. In June of 87, the Royal Commission cleared the Chamberlains of any guilt in the death of Azaria. He supported the view that she was actually taken and killed by dingo. So the Northern Territory offered them a pardon, which Lindy did not take. Do you want to know why?
Why?
Well, as she puts it, a pardon still indicates guilt.
Yes, it does.
She said in one of her interviews, she said the quashing of the charges would wipe them from the books. It means you didn't do it, that they got the verdict wrong. But a pardon just means, and this is her quote, you've been a good little boy or girl and you can go out and play.
Yes.
So she didn't accept that. And I don't blame her.
I don't blame her either.
They deserve for that injustice to be righted. Mm-hmm. They had already suffered so much. Their family had been torn apart.
Oh my goodness. And her baby, her other baby.
Their children had been picked on in school.
Oh, that's so sad.
So very sad. And then, of course, she didn't even get to bond with her new baby, and that baby was in foster care. But now the baby does come home to be with her and her husband.
Oh, it does? Mm-hmm. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, they get their daughter back. But still, she's missed all of those years of bonding with her.
Yes.
They said when she didn't really know who her mom was for a good bit,
And those first years are so important.
So it's just so much injustice there.
Yeah.
So much. So another year goes by. In 1988, The Supreme Court of Darwin quashed all the convictions, and the Chamberlains were declared innocent.
Good.
That is good. However, it's not over yet. In 1992, the government of the Northern Territory awarded the Chamberlains compensation in the amount of $1.3 million.
Okay.
So that's good.
Yes.
That didn't even cover a third of their legal fees.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So unfortunately. And even after that, there were 2 more inquests held by the Northern Territory government. So now that they have said, okay, you're innocent and all of that, and they quashed the charges instead of giving the pardon, they still haven't said definitively that a dingo did it. And at this point, I guess it is a point of contention. Like, no, you need to determine that the cause of death needs to be listed.
Right.
In December 1995, the Chamberlains were cleared again, but the coroner determined that the cause of death couldn't be determined. And the Chamberlains, they wanted a full clearance of their names and for that cause of death to be changed.
Yes.
The 4th and last inquest finally cleared the Chamberlains for good in 2012.
Oh, gracious.
When, after hearing evidence of at least 3 other dingo attacks on children since that 3rd inquest, finally, the Northern Territory Coroner's Office deemed that a dingo had indeed taken little Azaria way back on that fateful night in 1980.
Oh my goodness. That is a terrible case.
It really is. In the years that followed, the Chamberlains ended up divorcing. And while, you speculate that all of that stress caused their marriage to end, Lindy maintains that that was not the cause of their divorce. She said the reason for their divorce was present in their marriage before their baby was taken. And she went on to say the legal proceedings and the fight that they had, it gave them something to fight for together. And it kept them together. But when all that was over, the marriage was too. So she filed for divorce. Both Lindy and Michael went on to remarry. From what I could find, I think they both did remain in their Seventh-day Adventist faith.
Okay.
Lindy has written a book from her point of view that details the whole story. And I think her point of view is the most accurate.
Yeah.
It's called Through My Eyes. She's done a lot of speaking engagements about it. And the movie A Cry in the Dark, starring Meryl Streep, depicts that story. It's a very good movie. And Lindy says that it's 95% accurate.
Oh, I want to watch that now.
You need to watch it. It was really a good movie.
Yeah.
And that was, my friend Juanita watched it, and then she messaged me that I needed to do that one. Yeah. Michael died from cancer in 2017.
Oh.
At Michael's funeral, I did find this. I thought it was, I'm going to read. So there's a poem by Rudyard Kipling. It's called If.
Okay.
And one of the journalists that had covered this story read this at his funeral. And I thought, oh, how appropriate. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read the first and last stanza. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can feel the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
Wow. Wow. Oh, that makes me want to cry.
Yeah, and so just thinking of that being read at his funeral, because he and his wife both really exemplified those words.
Yeah. Yeah.
They, even in the midst of being tried by media and just all of that injustice, Lindy has gone on to say many times that she doesn't hold grudges. She has forgiven everybody. She has risen above all of the mocking that she endured, and she has moved on with her life, and just, she's become a public speaker at times. It just really exemplifies the words in that poem, how they rose above that adversity and suffering.
Yeah, which is rare.
Yeah, it's not something everybody can do.
Mm-mm.
So that whole story reminded me of the story of Joseph in Scripture, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, was put in prison unjustly.
Yeah, he seemed guilty probably to everybody.
Right? Can't you imagine? And he was there for like 2 years. And even at the end of his life, some of his last parting words in the book of Genesis were, "What you have meant for evil against me,
God meant for good."
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And so I feel like the Chamberlain's strong faith probably exemplifies that story in modern times better than anything I could imagine. You know?
Goodness, yeah.
That is the story of little Azaria Chamberlain, whose name actually means blessed of God.
Oh, goodness. Those sure were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
Uluru. I believe my wife has some stretchy pants from there. Now they say that when Chuck Norris was a baby, he crawled out of his tent and ate a dingo. And the reason they stopped letting people climb Uluru Rock in 2019 is because Chuck Norris said so. And if you decide you're going to venture out and climb that rock, you make sure before you do, you tell everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check out Hard Times and True Crimes. Because if Chuck Norris catches you, there's nothing we can do to help you. Till next time, goodbye.